We fear a myth. But the truth is not about a monster who drinks blood. It is about a man who spilled it, rivers of it. And what he did to the most vulnerable captives of his war, the women, was not simple cruelty. It was a message that forced the Sultan who conquered Constantinople to cover his eyes in horror. Vlad III, voivode of Wallachia, did not transform into a bat. He did not fear garlic or crucifixes. He was a creature of flesh and bone, a man of deep faith and terrifying intellect. To his people, he was a hero. To his enemies, he was Kazakh Bey, the lord of the stake. This is the story of how one man turned a forest into a graveyard. But to understand the monster, we must first look at the boy, because cruelty is rarely born. It is manufactured. Vlad's cruelty was forged in the very heart of the empire he would one day swear to destroy. As a child, Vlad did not grow up in the warm embrace of a family. In 1442, at roughly 11 years old, his father, Vlad II Dracul, handed him over to Sultan Murad II as a hostage. A human guarantee to secure Wallachia is loyalty. The Byzantine historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles documents this exchange in his writings. Imagine the psychological fracture. One day you are a prince in your father's court. The next, you are a prisoner in a foreign land, surrounded by the very people you were taught to hate. For 6 years, Vlad lived in the fortress of Edirne, the ancient Adrianople. He was educated alongside the future Sultan Mehmed II. He learned philosophy, sciences, the Turkish language. But he learned something else too. He watched. He watched the Ottoman efficiency in war. He watched how they disciplined their own troops. He watched how they used terror as a tool of governance. The Ottomans were masters of psychological warfare. If a village rebelled, they did not simply defeat it, they made an example of it. Vlad absorbed this lesson like a sponge. He understood that in a world of giants, the small man cannot fight with honor. To survive against a wolf, you cannot be a sheep. You must become a rabid dog. You must be so terrifying, so unpredictable, that even the wolf hesitates to bite you. When he was released and returned to Wallachia to reclaim his throne, the boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose heart had turned to cold iron. But what Vlad did once in power surpassed every lesson the Ottomans had ever taught him. When Vlad rose to power in 1456, he did not find a kingdom. He found a disaster. Wallachia was a buffer zone crushed between the Catholic Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. The nobles, the boyars, were corrupt, switching sides with every shift of the wind. Crime was rampant. Poverty was absolute. His first move was internal, and it was brutal. The German chronicler Michel Beheim documented it in 1463. Vlad invited the corrupt boyars to a banquet. He fed them. He poured them wine. And then he led them to the courtyard. He did not simply remove them from power. He reset the social order. He forced their families to build his fortress at Poenari, carrying bricks until their clothes fell apart. This was the first sign. For Vlad, there were only 2 categories: tools useful to Wallachia or obstacles. And obstacles were removed, without exception, without regard for gender or status. But his true target was always the south, the empire that had stolen his childhood. The Ottoman demands for tribute, gold, and young boys for the Janissary Corps grew heavier every year. In 1459, Vlad stopped paying. He did not simply refuse the tribute. According to the chronicles, he had the turbans of the Ottoman envoys nailed to their heads. It was a declaration of total war. He knew the Sultan would come. He knew the might of the East would descend upon his tiny principality. And he knew he could not win a conventional fight. So he prepared something that no army, however large, would be able to combat. In the winter of 1462, Vlad did not wait to be attacked. He crossed the Danube. He invaded Ottoman territory. This was not a conquest for land. It was a raid of extermination. He moved from village to village, leaving behind nothing but smoke and silence. His letters to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, real historical documents preserved in the archives, are chilling. He lists his victims with the precision of an accountant. 23,884 Turks and Bulgarians, he wrote, not counting those who were burned in their houses or whose heads were not presented to our officers. And here, in the frozen mud of the Danube banks, the fate of the captives was sealed. In medieval warfare, civilian prisoners usually had economic value. They could be ransomed, sold, or used as labor. But Vlad was not interested in economics. He was interested in psychological trauma. He gathered the captives, men, women, children, without separating them. He wanted the Ottoman soldiers to see the family unit destroyed together. And he began to perfect the method that gave him his name, the stake. We will not describe the mechanical details. What matters is understanding the result. The stake was not a quick death. It was not even designed to kill. It was designed to expose, to display. The victims were hoisted upright, visible from miles away. A person could remain suspended for days. And Vlad did not reserve this treatment only for soldiers. Why target civilians? Why break the unwritten rules of war? For Vlad, the captives represented the heart of Ottoman society. By destroying them, he was sending a message that no battlefield victory could ever transmit. I am not just fighting your army. I am erasing your future. The accounts of the time, documented by chroniclers such as the Greek Chalcocondals and the papal diplomat Niccolo Modrusa, describe scenes that defy all imagination. In one instance, after capturing the harem of a local pasha, Vlad did not sell the captives nor keep them for himself. He ordered them displayed before the city walls, arranged in geometric patterns. He created a forest of dying bodies. Picture an Ottoman scout riding ahead of the main army. He expects to find a battlefield. Instead, he finds a silent village where the only movement is the wind blowing through the hair of the dead. This was a psychological nuclear bomb, but it was not yet the final blow. What Vlad was preparing near his capital would make all of this seem like a prologue. But among all the chroniclers who documented these events, there is one who allows us to see through the eyes of someone who lived through those days. His name was Tursun Beg. He was a secretary and historian in the Ottoman army, attached to the Sultan's retinue. His work, the Tarihi Ebul Feth, is one of the few direct testimonies from a man who marched into Wallachia and saw with his own eyes what Vlad had prepared. Remember this name, because when we reach the forest of the impaled, it will be his words that tell us the horror. Spring 1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man who brought down the Eastern Roman Empire, assembles an army. It is a leviathan, roughly 80,000 men according to most historians. Cannons capable of shattering walls, the elite janissaries. They march north to crush the insolent Vlad Dracula. Mehmed expects a traditional war. He expects Vlad to entrench himself in a castle or meet him on an open field. But Vlad is a ghost. The Ottoman army marches into Wallachia and finds nothing. The fields are burned, the wells are poisoned, the livestock is slaughtered. A wasteland. The Ottoman soldiers are hungry, thirsty, they are picked off by arrows in the dark, and with every mile they march, the fear grows. Because they have heard the rumors, they have heard what happened to the captives. And then they reach the outskirts of Targovishte, Vlad's capital. June 17th, 1462. The sun is setting. The heat is oppressive. The Ottoman vanguard pushes through a dense forest, expecting to see the walls of the city. Instead, they enter a clearing, and the army stops. Tursun Beg was there. He walked with that army, and what he wrote in his chronicle reveals the moment an entire imperial army lost the will to fight. Before them stretched what would become known as the Forest of the Impaled, a valley extending for miles, populated by roughly 20,000 bodies, according to the chronicler Chalcocondals. It was not a chaotic pile of corpses. It was organized, hierarchical. High-ranking Ottoman officers were elevated above all others. Around them, a sea of civilians. Entire families arranged together. The scale of the operation meant that Vlad had spent weeks preparing all of this. It was not a sudden act of rage. It was an installation of death, designed with cold and methodical precision. The wind carried the smell. Flocks of crows and vultures darkened the sky. The silence of 20,000 dead is louder than any cannon. For the Ottoman soldiers, many of whom had wives and daughters back in Anatolia, the sight broke something inside them. It was not death itself. They were warriors. They knew death. It was the manner. It was the violation of the sanctity of the family. It was the most private sphere of life exposed to the most public, humiliating and agonizing form of death possible. Sultan Mehmed II was not a weak man. He had walked through the blood of Constantinople. He had ordered the execution of his own brothers to secure his throne. He was a man of iron. But Tursun Beg and Chalka Condyles both tell us that when the Sultan looked upon the forest of the impaled, he physically recoiled. He covered his face. The words attributed to Mehmed by these sources say everything. How can we strip of his lands a man who is not afraid to do this? A man capable of such things is worth more than a kingdom. It was a strange mixture of horror and twisted admiration. Mehmed understood that he was fighting a man with no limits, a man willing to turn his own country into a graveyard just to prove a point. The Sultan, sickened by the sight and the stench, ordered his army to retreat, the most powerful army in the world, defeated not by strategy, not by a superior force, but by a tableau of pure terror. And this is the darkest lesson Vlad Dracula left to history. Sometimes you do not need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be the thing your enemy cannot even bear to look at. But Vlad's story does not end in this forest.